Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's Talk Consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we want to thank you all for tuning in. Today in the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about thought freed from the control of the 5 corporeal senses. Listen as we discuss the benefits of being held, controlled, and governed by the divine law of life. In this show, we will explain how to access the divine principle before thought and above material sense. Know the truth and it will make you free. Free from the false belief in mortality and personal sense. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and experience the freedom of spiritual identity. Swami, the title of today's show is Liberation from Sense-Level Influence. So what do we mean by this title?
Yeah, in last week's show, when we talked about time, we touched upon Gilbert Carpenter wrote a paper called 500 Watching Points. And what he said in that paper, and I'll read it, is it not error to cherish the notion that the ability to comprehend the deep things of God is a developed quality attained through study and application alone? True, such study and application are needed in order to know what it is that prevents students from expressing and voicing the mind that was in Christ Jesus, a thing divinely and scientifically natural to one whose thought is freed from the influence of mortal mind. The student's higher task is to empty his thought so that the deep things of God may flow in. That really inspired me to continue with this subject of what does it look like when thought is freed from a material basis. And the unfortunate thing is we're so socialized to be sensual, sexual, to be imprisoned in the testimony of our corporeal senses that this is a radical way of thinking. But as you begin to test it, because that's the thing I really like about divine science, is that it's not just a belief system. It is a demonstrable principle.
So the liberation, we're talking about freedom, and then the sense-level influence is we're trying to get this freedom from our attachment to the world as we know it.
Right. We want to be free from this false sense of existence, this life that has a beginning and an end. Life is eternal. Life is spiritual. Life is changeless. And what we are perceiving through our corporeal senses is not life at all. If you have a willingness to accept that and you want to challenge it, then this is what we're talking about. How to prove the presence of this divine creation.
So now, I did use that word attach, so we want to try to detach from our senses, but I don't want to get confused with the New Age definition of detachment. Can you help me out with that?
Yeah. The question I have here now in my head is, how is selfless service different from spiritual service? Selfless may be still under the influence of duality, without what appears as a personal agenda for me, but there is a personal agenda for a you. To be spiritual service is impersonal awareness of the one divine self, the divine creation, which is perfect, whole, complete. And you can't petition the will of God. You have to recognize it is functioning. And the way that we do that is by coming out of the belief that it isn't functioning. And the reason we don't believe it's functioning is because we're approaching our lives primarily on a sense level of awareness. The divine creation will not report in our 5 corporeal senses. And so we have to come out of the mind that can't bring forth this divine image.
Well, let's talk more about what you mean from spiritual service. What does that look like if and when I'm doing it?
In order to be spiritual, in order to assume spiritual identity, you have to put off the belief that you are a finite mortal being. Give up the belief in matter, the belief that there are many out here. And you must rise initially as belief that there is one life. Now, religion kind of leads us to that in some way because they talk about one God. Most of us are really comfortable accepting one God. But what it really calls for is that we have to go much further. Just like selfless service, we think that because I'm doing this for you or for a cause that seems to be beyond my personal agenda, I'm doing the will of God. But we don't know the will of God until we put off personal sense. And we accept this mind that was in Christ Jesus, the divine mind, the mind that is too pure to behold iniquity. It doesn't see duality. It only sees the one. So even though you're doing all of this quote unquote good stuff, and you believe you are a good human, and you have accepted the golden rule as your mode of operation, it's not going to bring you this word that we're using, liberation, freedom from the belief in 2 powers, freedom from mortality. So in order to do spiritual service, you really must be in the will of the Father. One of the things that you'll learn is you don't get that from outside yourself. That comes to you from within. A litmus test on that is if your impartation is about personal sense, whether it is for you or someone beside yourself, if it doesn't have an agenda that is impersonal with the betterment of the greater whole, then chances are you're still working with information that's coming from either world thought or universal mind, but it's not the divine creative principle revealing itself to you.
So you said earlier, spiritual service is impersonal awareness for the one divine self. So I, Lisa, don't want to be aware of this one divine self. I have to look beyond myself and think of myself as one with the divine self.
Yeah, this is a very important part. Like you're saying, you don't want to be an individual thinking about God. One of the things that we have been saying, stop thinking, start knowing. The divine creation is going to be found before thought and above corporeal sense. In order for us to be able to rise into a level of awareness, we can find that place where our thought is the same as the divine idea. You literally stop thinking. And you make your mind an avenue of awareness for the presence of the divine creation, divine mind, the invisible, intangible, divine omnipresence. And from this perspective, there's a big difference between no self and oneself. Spiritual identity will dissolve the false sense of self, but it's not going to be no self. There's a big difference between the mystical experience and the psychotic, the neurotic, or the drug-induced states that we oftentimes misassociate with a spiritual awakening. Spiritual is not personal, but it is aware. We're aware of the invisible, intangible divine omnipresence. It's awareness of itself, and it loves itself, the one divine life. And I really like what Paul Stark-Seeley said. The connection is found in the thought unity between divine mind and the real man. When you assume spiritual identity, you are now assuming your true identity. Spirit translates everything back to itself. Spirit is one. It's whole. It can't be divided. So when Jesus says, I and the Father are one, this is a good example of what this impersonal spiritual selfhood is really all about. But it's not a loss of self-conscious awareness. It is a loss of personal sense. And it is the awakening of one's identity as being an intricate part of this complete, whole, one life that is unchanging and perfect.
Well, we have a quote in the summary that says, know the truth and it will make you free. And we're talking about liberation and freedom from this sense-level influence. So what exactly is this truth that is meant by that statement?
Well, the freedom they're offering is freedom from the belief in two powers, freedom from the belief that we are a separate entity, freedom from the law of karma. What we're putting out is what we're getting back. And spiritual awareness gives us liberation from all of these human concepts that make up this human recreation of the divine creation, this mental mirage that we're hypnotized by. We come out of time, space, concept, belief, thinking, personal sense, and human will. We surrender that false sense of who we are, but at the same time, we allow the one divine life, which is running a perfect universe, and we let it guide us. Now, of course, you must have that revelation. The one divine life must reveal itself to you from within. That's one of the things that we have been saying. Mary Baker Eddy says, for Jesus to walk on water is science. But until poor humanity can walk on water, don't step onto the Atlantic. This is a demonstrable principle. And if you start with it and you start to work with it, you must begin to prove it. Now again, you don't petition the will of God, but you have to recognize that it is functioning. And a big part of that recognition is starting out and rejecting everything that is reporting in your corporeal senses. But if you have fidelity to that divine creation, and I'm not talking about just denial of what is going on in your corporeal senses, that would be no self. But to accept your identity to be one with the divine creative principle has a return. And so you would rise out of the belief in the many into the understanding of that there is one life and it's perfect. And then from that level of awareness, you must be under the protection of that divine law, because it is the divine law of love. It is the one divine life looking at itself, as itself, of itself, to itself. And it loves itself. And that's, I think, very different than a lot of what we call selfless service, doing things for the betterment of other people. We're still on a personal level of awareness, and we haven't risen into the understanding of the one life. And then, like we said, we accept one God. But then by the same token, we continue to insult God by saying that all of this imperfection that we're seeing is the divine creation.
Well, we are going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. So listeners, we will be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Theory 1, Human Development and the 8 Essential Stages of Kriya Yoga. This program is a comprehensive course that will help you get your arms around the science of Kriya Yoga. It provides a clear understanding of the goals and objectives behind yoga, along with the physics of spirituality. It includes the practices, supportive concepts of Kriya Yoga, and the process in human development, apotheosis, the process of the human becoming divine. A complete guide on how to become a human in the adult state. Get the light in your soul and experience the simplicity and joy of union with the divine. This course is available in live classes at the ashram or online with 8 videos or 4 CDs. Visit our website, www.ipdtransform.com, for more information. Welcome back. For those who are just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. Swami, you said this phrase a couple of times, and you're talking about the one divine self, and you says it loves itself. Well, it got me to thinking, if we are a part of this divine life, then we should love ourselves. But in what way? We want to make sure that we are doing this divinely.
The way that I've been doing it is understanding there is no way that your life could be anything less than perfect. Now, coming back, if there is but one life and it is perfect, then of course it's the only life that you can be. Now, what does change is you graduate from this personal sense of self into this impersonal understanding of spiritual selfhood. The more you allow this divine creative principle to express itself through you, one of the things that you start to look at, which is very oftentimes different than what we do when we're trying to do this with selfless service, when we're still trying to do this as a human with an agenda, whether it's unconscious or conscious. And a big part of this is when we say stop thinking. I like what Gilbert Carpenter said, empty your mind. Stop thinking. Just make your mind aware for the presence of this one life. Initially, you just have to believe that there is one life. The next thing you have to understand is that one life is perfect. And so the clues that you must look for, it can't be good for me and not good for you. A spiritual solution is perfection. It is win-win for everyone. And so we use the testimony of our senses, what is reporting in our senses, to give us clues as to what am I conscious of? What is it that I'm calling the divine creation? What is it that I think is the Christ of my being? Because if it isn't proving itself, and I love what Mary Baker Eddy said in Science and Health on page 167-6. We apprehend life in divine science only when we live above corporeal sense and correct it. That's what we're talking about, being liberated from our 5 corporeal senses and not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You realize what is reporting in your 5 senses isn't real. It's not the truth of being. It's my thought about this truth, but it's giving me clues as to what am I conscious of. I think another great clue that Mary Baker Eddy gave us is found in Science and Health as well on page 552. But thought loosened from a material basis, but not yet instructed by science, may become wild with freedom and so be self-contradictory. If you are doing spiritual service, to do spiritual service, you have to be conscious of the divine creation, which means you can't be going out trying to fix things reporting in your corporeal senses. You really have to be a faithful witness to your understanding that life is perfect. And without reacting, without trying, striving, struggling, or planning, you are now attuning yourself to this one divine will that is running a perfect universe. Just like we have said, use the astrology. The simple fact that the sun rose on time gives you clues. God's running a perfect universe until it starts to reflect and trickle down into your experiences.
So let's just recap again. So where is this one life found?
Now, for the uninitiated, again, it's before thought and above corporeal sense. And for the enlightened, the one divine life is everywhere and in everything. Once we have graduated from living out from our 5 material senses, and we are now instructed with science, which means that we have cultivated spiritual sense. We're living out from our spiritual awareness of the divine creation. So again, this isn't guesswork. It is a spiritual science. But how do we activate our spiritual senses is by turning away from our material senses.
I believe we have some Bible verses that kind of backs up what we were just talking about. And the first one is from Zechariah 5:5. I'll read it and then you can help us summarize it. Then the angel that talked with me went forth and said unto me, Lift up now thine eyes and see what is this that goeth forth. What should we learn from that particular verse with what we're talking about?
The angel is the divine idea. That should appear to you within your consciousness. It gives you instruction. So Zechariah has given us the benefit of how it appeared to him. And then again, he said, lift up thine eyes. Like we had said in last week's show, if you fall through the ice, you don't want to continue swimming toward the shore because it will further imprison you. We want to rise. In Kriya Yoga, the term is pratyahara, sense withdrawal. You start to cultivate your spiritual senses. You start to trust them because you're looking for what is invisible and intangible to the mind that most of us have accepted to get us through this lifetime. And so repent means think differently. Just like anything else, as you start to develop it, and at first it may be awkward and unfamiliar to you, but you start to trust the invisible, intangible, divine creative principle. And from that perspective, again, you can start to see begging and pleading and asking God to do something for you, how it's hit or miss. Sometimes our prayers are answered, and religion says, who are we to question God? Sometimes God's answer is no. But in the Bible it says, ask in my name and it shall be given to you. Now what that means is in my likeness, in spiritual identity. In spiritual identity, we find that place where my thought is the same as the divine idea. That's the angel speaking to you from within.
So I think I'm understanding what you're saying. The next verse that I think backs up what we're talking about is Luke 10:23. And he turned him unto his disciples and said privately, Blessed are the eyes which see the things that ye see. It sounds like what it is you're just talking about.
Yeah, it's that whole concept of when you pray, go into the closet. Privately, you shut off the input from your corporeal senses. And we're graduating from that part of the mind that can only do one thing at a time, which is directly related to our corporeal senses. But then we've also learned about the mid-mind and the higher mind, that there is a part of the mind that can do many things at once. And for a lot of us, we're really happy when we have accomplished that. But all of these different levels or modes of thinking all rely on duality. They all get their input from our corporeal senses. And so we have to graduate to divine mind, that part of our mind that is doing everything at once. And it appears in our corporeal senses as nothing. But as we cultivate these spiritual senses, then this spiritual light dawns on us. And it has a very profound effect on what is appearing in our senses.
Last verse we have can really sum this up is Romans 11:7-8. What then? Israel hath not obtained that which he seeketh for, but the election hath obtained it, and the rest were blinded. According as it is written, God hath given them the spirit of slumber, eyes that they should not see, and ears that they should not hear, unto this day. So it sounds to me like the eyes and the ears, obviously part of our 5 corporeal senses, so it sounds like it's cautioning us, eyes should not see and ears should not hear. We have to get above that.
And to understand that as what we're saying, they're talking about the information that's coming through our corporeal senses. This sense level living is the false sense of existence. And we have to put that off, because what we're calling life isn't life at all. What is life is perfect, eternal, unchanging.
Well, I think we should talk about now this quote that's in the Isha Upanishad, which is something that we chant every Sunday on mantra at 6 o'clock. So can you read that for us?
Yeah, the Isha Upanishad supports everything that we're saying. The Kriya Yoga that we teach and the divine science that Mary Baker Eddy discovered dovetails. They're all saying the same thing. Truth is truth. And I'll read it. The self is one, unmoving, it moves swifter than thought. The senses do not overtake it, for always it goes before. Remaining still, it outstrips all that run. Without the self, there is no life. To the ignorant, the self appears to move, yet it moves not. From the ignorant, it is far distant, yet it is near. It is within all, and it is without all. He who sees all beings in the self, and the self in all beings, hates none. To the illumined soul, the self is all. For him who sees everywhere oneness, how can there be delusion or grief? That's the end of the quote. We really must understand that there is but one life. And that really becomes the solution to most of the common problems we're hacking at the branches of. And more, I look at how this works and I'm experiencing some of the benefits that come with it. I really think people would get so much more out of this if they understood it as a science, that it is a demonstrable principle. And we stop believing we are a mortal being with an expiration date, and we start to see that concept of love thy neighbor as thyself, because what is appearing as a neighbor is really only our thought about what is really there, which is the one divine life, perfect, whole, complete. As we rise above the testimony of our senses and we accept our spiritual understanding as what is real, consciousness is experience. If you're conscious of the perfection of being, then it must externalize as harmony, peace, love, healing.
And I just wanted to make a point when you were reciting the Isha Upanishad verse. Every time you said the word self, it is self with a capital S, not meaning the self is an our self. So I just want to kind of make that point and make that distinction. For example, one sentence you said is, the self is one. And again, that self with a capital S, meaning the divine self. And of course, I've always really liked, he who sees all beings in the self and the self in all beings hates none. I get a really lot out of that one particular sentence there. And so I just wanted to kind of point that out, and maybe you might have something to add to that.
Well, again, it's the whole thing of impersonalization. We must begin to impersonalize and start to spiritualize. And even on a mortal, sensual, material, corporeal level, we want to start to change our concepts that would be more in tune with the divine idea, the divine creation.
Well, we do have to start breaking down our show for today, so listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. When you're on the homepage and you see the fading banner, Blog Talk Radio, if you click that directs you to the Blog Talk Radio show catalog page. And then also by clicking on the products tab, then online classes, that directs you to all the classes that Swami has available for you. So Swami, with that, do you have any other final thoughts about today's program?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and experience the freedom of spiritual identity. Namaste.
Well, thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton along with Swami Jayananda signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.